District attorneys in California are saying that Uber is ineffective when doing criminal background checks. Prosecutors say the ride-hailing service failed to uncover the criminal records of 25 drivers in 2 cities. So, long story short, murderers, sex offenders, and criminals were behind the wheel. Attorney Jay Apt is with me now. He argues that no background checks are foolproof unless you have access to the government system. Whitney Bowen here as well. She says these efforts are a deliberate attempt to smear Uber. They are with me now. So first and foremost, Jay, what do you mean that Uber, it sounds like from what you're saying, is not responsible because the service does not have access to, say, FBI or local police records?
Right. So no private industry really has foolproof background checks. The national database that the FBI keeps, called the NCIC, or National Crime Information Computer, is the comprehensive, authoritative record on criminal records. And private background checks aren't always as thorough as they should be when doing this. Having said that, I think Uber is going to hit a major problem with litigation at some point, if not right now, because if they're letting murderers and child molesters and rapists as drivers, eventually they're going to get privately sued because somebody's going to get killed by one of these drivers and they're going to have legal liability.
Yeah, well, picking up on that, I'm just looking at one line of one report which said a convicted murderer who spent 26 years in prison before being released on parole in Los Angeles was behind the wheel. And to your point, Jay, there's a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, who let their teens go in cars, who call Uber cars to get them what they think is safely from point A to point B. Whitney, is it your estimate that, as Jay says, there could be lawsuits, individual lawsuits against Uber for not protecting its passengers, or even class action ones?
I think that it's possible that there could be anecdotal situations where there would be lawsuits. But, you know, I do believe that this is very politically motivated. Or, in other words, haters are going to hate. Because the truth is, what makes this any different than what taxi companies do with regard to doing background checks for their drivers? Is there any evidence that there's any difference between the incidents of crossing over it?
That Uber has been more lax. And I guess to your point, from a legal standpoint, that would be the burden of Uber's lawyers or the prosecutor's side to show that Uber is less attentive, let's say, than your average taxi company.
And I don't know that there's any evidence that they are. I have yet to see any studies or evidence that they are more lax than anyone else. And they are doing background checks. They're not doing it to the standard maybe that the prosecutors would like in terms of how far back they're going, but they are doing it at a standard that is pretty normal for private industry. They're going back far enough, and there's going to be incidences where they miss stuff.
There actually is evidence.
Go ahead, Jay.
There's actually evidence that they're not using the same standard as taxi cab companies, that Uber has been using a lower standard, and so they're not uncovering a lot of these folks who are murderers and rapists. And I think the problem is not just that eventually there's going to be a criminal act that's going to result in liability. It's going to drive prices up for Uber. But also you have to remember, Uber isn't providing commercial insurance for these drivers, and there's working its way through the court systems now are these lawsuits where Uber is basically arguing they're not liable when an Uber driver causes an accident. So it's not even just the background checks for criminal acts, it's the driving record that they're not looking at either.
Jay and Whitney,
evidence that Uber drivers are more dangerous than taxi cab drivers either.
All right, hold those thoughts, both of you. It's a good conversation. We're going to take a short break. We'll continue the conversation in just a minute.